Ask me to play the piece I'm trying to play, and I'll show you how fast I can actually play because I'm familiar with the vocabulary, I'm familiar with the repertoire, I'm familiar with what it means to actually play fast within the context of a piece of music that is required to be played fast. In this video, I'm going to discuss the concept of attaining speed, specifically as it applies to the snare drum, although this will of course apply to anything regarding the drum set as well. I want to start with a bit of a disclaimer because this is a topic that I have been somewhat reluctant to talk about in the past. I find many students, and I was the same as well when I was learning, become preoccupied with speed, have an unhealthy obsession with being fast at the expense of far more important and practical things. So I just want to state that our musical worth, our worth as musicians, is not, should not, and never will be defined by how fast we are. Speed is a tool. Our technique is a tool. If we are called upon to play something that happens to be fast, we require the technical ability to play that. Speed for its own sake is a waste of time. And this is actually going to have knock-on effects into how we practice speed as well, as we shall see shortly. But I just want to start by saying there are far more important things to worry about than simply how fast you can play, say, a paradiddle or a single-stroke roll. That said, we of course need to develop our speed to a certain level dependent entirely on the context and what it is we are trying to play. Death metal drummers require blast beats and double bass speed for the songs they play. Marching drummers will require certain rudimental speeds depending on the marches and the repertoire they play. It is all dependent on what we are trying to do and what we are trying to achieve. And again, as we shall see, this is going to have implications as to how we actually go ahead and develop the speed we are working towards. Speed is a byproduct of control and familiarity. We can't just have speed and conceptualize it in the same sense that we might consider a sprinter trying to get from A to B in as short a time as possible. That is not how it works. That is not how music works. We need to consider speed, as I say, as a byproduct of control. So anything that goes and increases our control is by default going to increase our speed as well. But I again want to reiterate here how speed comes from control. Once we have our control, we can play our speed or play fast effortlessly. And this is again going to be one of the core themes of what I discussed today. We want to try and avoid any sense of sort of sweating, tense, forceful pushing, because that has no value to us. It may achieve a few extra BPM on a drumometer, but in terms of real application to the repertoire, to the music you are trying to play, it is worthless, and we shall see why shortly. So, rule number one, if you want to improve your speed, improve your control. This means evaluating your technique, evaluating the weak points, and crucially, repeating for longer than you may think. And one of the things that we really have to take into consideration is speed develops over time as the result of lots and lots of sustained repetition. So, first of all, I'm going to suggest a practice method that will cover all of these events. It will increase your speed, it will increase your control, and crucially, it will increase the number of repetitions you are doing in one go. So the basic methodology that I like to follow is this. First of all, of course, I decide what it is I'm trying to practice, whether it's a single stroke roll just on its own, whether it's a particular passage from a piece of music, or whether it's a drum fill on the kit, or whatever it may be. We need to be very, very clear as to what it is we are trying to speed up. Speed does not happen in a vacuum. Speed of what? Okay? How fast am I as a person? Well, that question is far too vague. How fast am I at doing what? Chopping tomatoes, or playing a single stroke roll, or playing a paradiddle? Those values are going to be different. Some of them, single strokes and paradiddles, might be related. Others, running 100 meters and chopping tomatoes, probably not related. So we need to be very clear, as obvious as it sounds, as to what it is we are trying to improve. Now, let's just start with a single stroke roll and say I am trying to improve the raw speed of my single stroke roll. Maybe I'm here and I want to get to here, or here, or whatever it is you're trying to achieve. We need to know what it is we are trying to achieve. Now, consider your target tempo. Let's just say, for argument's sake, you are trying to get to 200 beats per minute at 16th notes. 16th notes at 200 BPM is your target tempo. First of all, we need to find out where you are currently. Maybe you're at 16th notes at 140 beats per minute, 150, 170. It doesn't really matter, but we need to find the tempo at which you are able to sustain in a controlled manner for, let's say, 1 minute. I'm going to work with a duration of a minute here today, and I'll discuss the nuances of that a little later on. But let's just go with 1 minute for now. Currently, what is the tempo at which you can hold a perfect, controlled, relaxed, single-stroke roll for 1 minute? Let's say it is 150 beats per minute. You stick the metronome at 150, 1 minute is no problem. You can sit there quite comfortably for 1 minute. Let's move up a little bit. Let's add 5 BPM. Let's go to 155 and let's think of a 10 BPM range. So 155 to 165. Your goal is to get to 165 in this exact practice session. So everything we are going to do is going to be related to this particular practice session. We're going to start at 155 and we are going to do our single stroke roll for 1 minute. And crucially, you need to be watching it. You need to be evaluating it, giving yourself real-time feedback. So maybe as you're playing, and I'm not going to do this at 150, maybe as you're playing, you're self-evaluating and you're thinking, my left thumb is in a slightly different position to my right thumb. The point of contact between the stick and my left index finger is slightly different to the point of contact on my right hand. My fingers on my left hand are engaging slightly differently. The elbow angle is slightly different. The angle that my sticks are coming in at. All of these thoughts are happening in real time as you are doing it, and you're trying to correct as you go. You're trying to just make these micro adjustments. Now, this all may sound like an inordinate amount of work, but actually what this is doing is making us focus. Studies have shown again and again from a neurological perspective, if we want repetition to improve our action, we have to focus on that repetition. So the act of providing real-time feedback, and if you can do this, you can see on my music stand, or maybe you can't, just here, I've got a mirror. If you can do this in front of a mirror, even better, because you can watch things like, I'm looking in the viewfinder of the camera now, I'm looking at things like the stick heights. Maybe the stick heights are uneven, maybe the angles are uneven, maybe my wrists or hands and arms in some way are uneven. I'm constantly looking for ways to provide feedback to myself and adjust as I go. So my minute of repetition is not looking out the window, it is focused, it is evaluating, and it is correcting actively. It is a very engaged 1 minute. Now, let's assume at 155 you get to the 1 minute mark and you are satisfied. It doesn't need to be perfect, but it needs to be satisfactory, such that you got from the first to the last stroke and you were able to sustain a steady tempo, confident, relaxed, and you were making those minute corrections as you go. If you are sufficiently satisfied, increase the tempo by 2 BPM. So repeat the process at 157. Do the same thing. Go for 1 minute, evaluate, provide feedback. If you are satisfied, +2. If you are satisfied, +2. Now, if you do 5 satisfactory minutes in a row, you're going to get to your 165 tempo in 5 runs. That's job done. You can move on and you can come back to it later. Now, crucially, if during one of those repetition runs, during the minute, whether it's at 155, your starting point, maybe it's at 159, it doesn't matter. If at some point in your minute you make a mistake, maybe you click your sticks together and you drop them, maybe you just lose coherence and you start flamming, or you start just losing control of that stick, reduce the tempo by 1. If you make a mistake, drop it by 1, crucially 1 BPM, not 2. So this means if you start at 155 and your first minute goes badly, you drop down to 154. If that goes badly, you drop down to 153, 152. Maybe you drop all the way down to 145. But then at 145, you do it perfectly. So you go back up to 147, 149, 151, etc. Your goal, as best as you are able, is to crawl all the way right back up to 165, your original target tempo, regardless of how low you have dropped. Now, if you set a goal for yourself within the practice session, today, right now, I am going to get to 165, whether it takes me 5 minutes or an hour, you have something focused. You will have a tangible, measurable goal which you have achieved at the end of your practice session. Now, if after an hour you're still struggling round about the 150 mark, your tempo target is too high. Drop it down and try again. So that is the method I like to use, whether it is for something very, very simple like a rudiment, or whether it's a passage from a piece I'm learning or anything else. I highlight the passage, I define it very, very clearly, I decide on my target tempo, I see where I am currently in relation to that target tempo, then within the space of one single practice session, I set a 10 BPM range. I start at the bottom of that range, repeat for 1 minute. If my repetition is satisfactory, I increase the tempo by 2 BPM and I keep going until I get to my target tempo. If my minute is unsatisfactory, if I make a mistake, if I lose control, if my technique goes wrong, if I drop the stick, I reduce by 1 BPM. So it's always 2 steps forward, 1 step back if we need be. Now, a few things to note. First of all, we need to sustain this over a long period of time. What I have just described occurs within one practice session. You need to do that regularly over many practice sessions, over many weeks or months. And what you will find is that that target tempo gradually creeps up and up and up as things go. So maybe in the first few days you are stuck at the 155 to 165. Then maybe after you reach 165, maybe on your third or fourth day, you push it to 170. So your tempo range that you practice at becomes 160 to 170. 165 to 175, 170 to 180, and so on. So we're adding just a few BPM each time to our 10 BPM range over a sustained period. Now, I mentioned a few things which I wanted to come back to. First of all was the duration. The 1 minute per run figure that I suggested is completely arbitrary. You might want to do it 5 minutes per run, or you might want to do it in a group of 100 bars of 4/4, or you might want to do 20 seconds per run. It is all down to how much time you are able to dedicate to your practicing and this goal in particular. So I will generally work in either a number of repetitions, maybe a block of 50 bars or 20 bars, or if I've got a bit more time, 100 bars, or I will just use something like a minute or a minute and a half or 2 minutes. Ideally, you don't want to be doing less than a minute. You want to be trying to sustain your repetition for at least a minute, regardless of the tempo, regardless of the number of repetitions you are doing. The second thing I want to talk about, and this is really the second crucial concept that I want to discuss today, is about taking speed out of context. Now, I used in my example to describe my practice session or my practice method, just a single stroke roll. If I think about everything I play, which these days is mostly on the snare drum, but things I play on the drum kit as well, it is very, very, very rare that I will just play a fast single stroke roll. Likewise for double strokes, likewise for buzz strokes, likewise for paradiddles. We all get so obsessed with playing rudiments out of context at a certain speed. How fast can you play paradiddles? How fast can you play double strokes? The problem is, we don't get called upon to play those things out of context. Instead, we get called upon to play these things in context. And it is completely conceivable, and I know this because I see it all the time. Somebody can come to my studio and play on the pad or play on the kit, and they will have blazing fast paradiddles or double strokes or something like that. Put them in front of some snare drum repertoire, and they will struggle. Not because they can't play fast enough, but because they are not familiar with the particular figures they are being called upon to play. Maybe they've got blazing fast paradiddles, but when they're called upon to play a paradiddle, transitioning into it from a 5-stroke roll and out of it into a 6-stroke roll or something like that, or maybe it's in a quintuplet, or maybe it's following a paradiddle diddle figure, who knows the context in which that paradiddle is actually placed, they find that all of that speed they've built up just playing paradiddles is functionally useless. So, the one mantra that I like to keep, and this is something I would encourage you to consider in your own playing as well, speed out of context is again worthless. Instead, what is it you are trying to play fast? I want to be able to play the music I am trying to play at the required tempo. Okay, in this bar here, there is a double stroke roll, which is part of a 9-stroke roll within a 9-tuplet in the tempo in a certain time signature. Or I mean, looking at my piece here, it's in 18/16, and I've got groups of 9 per beat with some diddle strokes in there. So I think, okay, diddle strokes, that's double strokes, right? So I'm going to go and practice double strokes. And I spend the next year really focusing on my double stroke speed. And then I come back and I'm puzzled to find that I can't play this piece any faster than I could when I started. I might have blazing fast double strokes on a pad to a metronome, but I still can't play the piece I was actually intending to play. So whatever it is you are intending to play fast, that is what you need to be practicing. If you're having difficulty with a certain fill on the kit, or you're having difficulty with a certain bar in a piece of music, don't try and extrapolate that outwards to an exercise that covers the bases. Practice the actual thing you are trying to get fast at. Crucially, ultimately, this all comes down to repetition, not mindless repetition, focused repetition. So I hope this has given you something to think about in terms of the broad concept of speed. We can't focus on speed for its own sake. I can play relatively fast when it comes to single strokes. Ask me to play the piece I'm trying to play, and I'll show you how fast I can actually play because I'm familiar with the vocabulary, I'm familiar with the repertoire, I'm familiar with what it means to actually play fast within the context of a piece of music that is required to be played fast. That has nothing to do with how fast I can just play a single stroke roll on a pad. And I would encourage you all to think about that in your own journeys as well. So, just to recap, I don't mean this to be a complete sidestep of the concept of speed. I have hopefully given you some things to think about with regards to practical application. I would encourage you all in that 10 BPM +2 or -1 approach to actually do that with something musical. Do it with a John Pratt passage, a bar from John Pratt or something like that. Do that with something you are actually going to use and apply. Don't just do that with a paradiddle, okay? Because that is not going to help you. That is not going to make you a better drummer. Warm up with that, sure. Spend 5 minutes using it as a warm-up, just as something that's fun or interesting. But when you are actually dedicating serious practice time over weeks and months, apply it to something that you actually require fast. If you're a death metal drummer, apply it to a blast beat that you're going to apply in a specific song. If you're a rudimental snare drummer, apply it to that Will Coxon piece you are trying to work on, right? Context is everything. Once that context is established, familiarity, control, focused repetition, and crucially, persistence over a longer time period. That is what your speed is going to be built upon, and that is what's going to make you a better musician in the long run. For those of you that are interested, the Snare Drum Virtuoso puts all of this to practice because it is a book of technical studies designed to improve technique, but within an applicable way. It's full of technical studies that are actually miniature pieces of music. So if you are looking at the single stroke technical studies, they are solos, they are pieces of repertoire that happen to contain single strokes in specific ways. And that is far more beneficial seeing them applied, seeing them used as musical vocabulary and increasing your technique and your speed that way, rather than just playing single strokes on a pad endlessly. So if you're interested, I encourage you to consider that. And please do think about this from a long-term perspective, from a musical perspective. Best of luck in your own practicing, and I'll see you on the next one. Thank you very much.